Thanks for staying with us this morning. We're at the Kansas Beef Council office here in Topeka. We're joined by Kevin Thielen, who's the Executive Director of the Kansas Beef Council. And every year we kind of get together with Kevin and kind of get a state of the state, I guess you might say, when it comes to the Beef Council. And checkoff is something that continues to grow here in the state of Kansas. And you guys are awfully busy this time of the year.
Yeah, we are. And first off, Brian, thanks for coming by. I appreciate always having the chance to talk about some of our activities. And you're right, September, October for us, it's kind of that transition period where we're going from talking about grilling into kind of some family meal times and things like that. And so a lot of the events that we do would correspond to that. We have a registered dietitian on staff, Audrey Monroe, and Audrey did a training for the University of Kansas and also Kansas State University dietetics trainings. And so that went on earlier this year. Charlotte Huseman, who's our culinary expert, did a training at Johnson County Community College about 2 weeks ago, where they brought in two different one-day sessions to where basically it was showing KC chefs and other beef kind of specialty folks kind of how to keep beef on the menu. Some new recipe ideas that the checkoff has coming, and that was always really successful. We do that as often as we can because there's a lot of upside for us when we start talking about culinary. That's an area that consumers have a lot of interest in. And then the last thing that I just wanted to mention here quickly, Brian, beef quality assurance continues to be more important for us from an activity standpoint because our consumers are identifying it as more important. They want to know that there's guidelines out there that farmers and ranchers use to raise cattle. And so it's very important from that standpoint. And then also kind of that message of rancher continuing to improve on their abilities over their production year is very powerful. We use Dr. Dan Thompson to do a lot of those trainings, and Dr. Dan has a great rapport. John Soxie, our industry relations person, is going to be rolling out some of those to FFA chapters across the state of Kansas. And they're going to be doing that on the online format. So a lot of things going on. We could go into more depth, but those are some of the highlights here for you.
Well, when you talk about what consumers want, if you look at the new veterinarian feed directive, that's another step forward of just ensuring or reassuring consumers that what's going on in the beef industry is really putting them and their wants and desires up front.
Well, yeah, the relationship between the producer and the vet, it's going to continue to become more important. And so that the VFD, I know Kansas Livestock Association and K-State have done a lot with that, making sure producers are ready for that when that comes first part of the year. And from our standpoint, from a consumer messaging side, you're right. It is very powerful because people have questions about where their food comes from.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about exports, kind of what's going on. We're at kansasAGreport. We'll see you in just a minute.
This segment brought to you by Farm Bureau, a grassroots ag organization representing the state's farmers and ranchers since 1919. KFB.org. Oldie Seed Farms, carrying soil-specific seed. Find them on the web at oldieseed.com. That's OHLDE seed.com. Grass and Grain, online or in the mail, keeping Kansas farmers informed for over 60 years. grassandgrain.com. Kansas Wheat Commission, leaders in the adoption of profitable innovations for wheat. Online at kswheat.com.
Thanks for staying with us. We're at the Kansas Beef Council office here in Topeka. We're joined by Kevin Thielen, who's the Executive Director of the Kansas Beef Council. And Kevin, exports, I said this earlier to Justin over at the Kansas Wheat office. Nobody does agriculture better than our farmers and ranchers here in the state of Kansas. And exports are extremely important to us as we continue to grow.
Well, yeah, and being very aware, I know in my small cow herd that I have at home, prices are down. And I think exports are going to be very, very important in the next couple of years. Right now, exports account for 14% of our total beef production. We're exporting outside of this country. And, the real thing that you need to remember there is what we do a lot of times is it's products such as livers that are going to Egypt. And I read a stat a while back that, 90% of all livers that we produce beef livers go to Egypt, and you think about the importance of some of those markets, but just incredibly important.
I always say hoof to hide.
Hoof to hide, that's right. The market's very efficient. It gets things to where they're the most value, and that's something we have to continue to focus on. From January through July, Brian, exports were down this year, about 10% lower, accounted for $3.45 billion. We think when we get to the end of 2016, we think our exports are actually going to be up for the year. You know, last year, prices and the value of the dollar and all of those things kind of worked against us, but I think we see moving forward as a real opportunity, and we're trying to focus on that. You know, our top 5 beef export markets, Japan would be our largest, followed by Mexico, South Korea, Canada, and the Middle East. And so those are the important markets when we start talking about exports. And kind of with the general focus of the importance of those markets, Kansas corn and the Kansas soybean, along with the Kansas Beef Council, we went to the U.S. Meat Export Federation and we targeted South Korea. And we targeted South Korea with basically fresh beef, because what we're seeing is that's a real opportunity. In fact, to this year, South Korea as a market is up 23%. So a lot of opportunity. Korean barbecue is very important. John Soxie and I went and met with a group of South Korean chefs here about 10 days ago. And the low and slow barbecue is the next trend that's coming in Korea. So they're getting a lot of, I'll call them Texas-style barbecues over there. And that's really growing and really taking off. And so a lot of opportunity for us to export over there.
Well, not only that, and I've said this before, and Kevin has probably said it 100 times, we're not the only state in the union that produces beef, but we do it more efficiently than anybody else in the union. So we want to make sure we're getting out and recognizing those open markets and growing those open markets. Anything coming up in the next couple months before we get to the end of the year?
You know, working on, as we start talking about kind of as consumers' perceptions and those trends all change, Charlotte Huseman's got a lot of holiday roast, some advertising opportunities, and also some cooking classes she's going to be doing in Kansas City. Scott Stebner we just hired Scott, and we're going to be doing a lot more with video. It's amazing. We're focusing on the millennial consumer because they're just coming into having an income and, you know, kind of stepping out there, and they're making some buying decisions. So we're really targeting them, and Scott has allowed us to really get out there in that digital front. So